Are first up with Dr. Joel Ward, who needs no introduction, at least to most of you, and very much looking forward to what you have to say about rhetoric as ornament. Thank you, Joel.
Good morning, everyone. I will not be reading much of the paper, but instead just try to cut for you an outline of the argument that I'm trying to make. And emphasis on try. But I think as introduction I'd like to say that this paper is largely inspired by maybe a fine distinction that we observe but is very important to us, which is the distinction between awe and stupor, right? So awe and stupor maybe have similar phenomenological characteristics. People who are stupefied maybe be in repose, or not repose, relaxed, and those kinds of things. And people also who are in awe of something may find a certain kind of stillness that they experience, but I think they're quite distinguishable from each other. And related to yesterday's comments regarding the vacation of the mind, right, that occurs when we lose kind of like a memorable sense of things. And so I'm actually going to do mostly a preamble to try to demonstrate why I think rhetoric may in fact be the ornamental quality of literacy. And so I'll do that with a couple different questions. And so Gaston Bachelard says in his Poetics of Space that being begins with well-being. And also God in Genesis chapter 1 says of creation that it is very good, right? And so he begins with a word of praise for the things that we live in, right? We live on the earth. And so the question is, in this paper, is what is the quality of praise? And how does this kind of speech reveal the character of rhetoric as ornamental? And I'm working with several different authors. Antoine Cacon, who's an architectural theorist, is very interested in the reemergence of ornament in contemporary architecture. Robin Ream's discussion of the relationship between seeming and being in Platonic thought. Ivan Illich's work on the question of ascesis, right, what it means to discipline the senses. And Jean Chrétien's Spacious Joy, which is a meditation on the nature of dilation of the heart. And so it's a very fascinating question that arises, right, from basically what is it that draws our attention, but also opens a space in which we can understand more deeply the essential character of the thing that appears. And so just a brief etymological history of the word ornament. It is the anglicized version of the Latin ornatus, or several other derivatives of that word, which largely mean the order of things, but also is a translation from the Greek word cosmos, which we also understand to mean the order of the universe, or the structure of the universe. But also we know that in our contemporary anglicized version of cosmos, we also get the word cosmetic, which is a word that we use to think about simply something that is applied on top of or the surface of, but is not related to the substance of which it covers. And so, but it does, in one sense, cosmetic does actually help us understand the nature of ornament, which is an appearance, right, or a revelation of a reality and all that is, right? And so actually, whereas we might say that someone who covers their face too much with cosmetics has some problem, right? We might think about, them having some kind of issue. We actually are saying, right, in that particular case, that the appearance of their face in the way that it is covered is telling us something about the inside, right, of them, their heart, their soul, the nature and condition of who they are. And so there's a couple different features of ornament that I think are quite helpful as we consider them. The first one is that ornament directs attention and places emphasis on that which it adorns, right? So it increases, so in speech, for example, it increases the qualities of speech. And we've been hearing about that yesterday in particular, right? The nature of poetry is an enhancement of the qualities of speech, both rhythm and intonation. And by amplifying those and ornamenting language that way, we pay closer attention to what the words are doing. And that close attentiveness then also demonstrates itself in the kind of memorable nature of the speech. It's also just an increase in interest, right? So ornaments are meant to increase an interest in something, and they are maybe more pointed in the way that they increase that interest. The second is that ornament possesses a certain sensitivity or a fine articulation of a thing, right? So a person who gives a well-spoken word, actually the Proverbs say this, is kind of like a ring, right? It's like a piece of jewelry, right? And so a word fitly spoken is what it says, is kind of like apples of gold in a setting of silver, right? So it gives it this sense of jewelry, right? But it possesses this fine articulation. It's very sensitive, and jewelry actually requires a great degree of fine skill, both in the metalwork, but also in the carving of a gemstone, okay? And one of the things that's interesting is that it makes what was previously insensible sensible, right? So ornament, a diamond that has been cut very carefully reveals the inner structure of the stone itself. Whereas before, if you've seen an uncut diamond, it's really hard to determine whether that is a diamond or not until someone starts to ornament it, right, by revealing its inside. And so it's very fascinating to consider the fact that ornament is an increase of sensitivity, right? It reveals a sensitive awareness of reality. And I find that an interesting juxtaposition with kind of the increase of sensors in life, right? We have a lot of sensors for everything, sensors on everything, which is a displacement of sensory sensitivity, right? Your car will talk to you when you back up now. And so I think it's very fascinating just to see, even in our a desire to instrumentalize the world, we give it sensitive skins, right? We put them on the surface and they adorn the exterior of our objects, okay? And then the last one, or the third, is that ornament covers, right, in order to show. Right? I think this is a fascinating problem, right? So you put on an earring so that people will look at your ear, right? You don't put on an earring so they will be distracted. And so it covers up an earlobe, it covers your earlobe, right? But it also then attracts, right, or shows the ear. And so this is an interesting quality of ornament, that it covers something, but in its covering, it reveals. So it's not meant to conceal, but to reveal. And in one sense, we would say it's similar to the way the Greeks understood rhetoric, which is to shed light upon something, or to bathe something in light, is to speak of it. And so ornament is, and this is an allusion to the claim that I'll be making later. And then the last one is that ornament displays the quality of the material that it arises from. And I think this is also a very interesting condition of ornament, right? So ornament can be very, very fine and articulate if it's dealing with a very substantial material. But the insubstantial nature of material cannot actually bear up under ornamental efforts, right? So you need a hard thing in order to really have a fine articulation of something. And it's interesting also that it reveals the character of hardness as well. So something that's very brittle can be ornamented as well, but then it also makes it very delicate. Whereas something that is more malleable won't actually sustain as much ornamental articulation, but is maybe more, more capable of flexing under pressure. But it is true that the degree of the substance, or I don't want to say hardness, but the durability of a material allows for it to be more finely articulated, right? That's why the sharpest knives are of the hardest material, right? you're able to put a very fine edge on something. And so ornament displays the quality of the material that it arises from. And so a careful treatment of the surface of the thing, right? Even the burnishing of a metal, right, shows to you kind of like the radiant quality of the material, okay? And so what does this have to do with praise, right? Well, it's because I'm using all these examples which are more about the material world to try to think hard about the nature of speech, right, as it arises from our sensory experience, right? So, you can read Vico or others who actually suggest, right, that speech arises kind of metaphorically from awful, right, awful sensory experiences. And his particular example is thunder, right? What is thunder, and how do we experience it when we don't know what it is, right? And so he says, early society suggested it was the language of the gods, right? Which isn't so far-fetched, right? Because when God descends upon the mountain, there's a lot of thunder and fire, and an earthquake as well, so a lot of rumbling. And so what does this have to do with praise? Well, praise in speech is, in one sense, we could say ornamental, right? So praise carefully attends, right? It carefully attends to the thing that it is observing, right? And Aristotle says this is the nature of rhetoric, right? It's a careful observation. It's a very careful observation of the thing that it attends to, right? And then by observing it, right, it allows for us to see what is desirable of the thing that is being observed, right? Like it increases our interest. It places attention upon, right? It's another way of saying it, perhaps. The second way is that ornament returns, right? So we might think about attention as just kind of like a glance or kind of like a look. But in fact, an ornament actually, first reveals and then kind of like mystifies, right? And so then you return and you look again, right? Because it draws our attention and then sustains it. So ornament returns, right? It causes us to return to the thing that we are observing or smelling or touching or tasting, or those kinds of things. Okay, you have a very delicate, beautiful, lovely tasting meal, and you return to the restaurant, right? That's what you do. You return because of the way that the food has been treated. Okay, and the third is that ornament in speech. Right? And in fact, that's related to this question of awe versus stupor, because if you had a wonderful meal and someone says, "How was your food?" You're just like, how can I say? Right? And someone more articulate will say, "Well, let me explain it to you." Right? Okay. Okay. But third, ornament distinguishes and elevates, right? And that's what praise does, oftentimes. It brings something up, right? And then it elevates it, right? It raises it up above kind of like what would be maybe our natural attitude about something, and elevates it and distinguishes it from the background, right? And I think that's kind of interesting, right? Everyone has ears for the most part, right? But when you put a particular ornament on an ear, people notice your ears, right? They notice them, right? Otherwise, we just look at people's ears as if they're just an apparatus for hearing. But as soon as you ornament an ear, all of a sudden it becomes a feature of the person's body, right? A ring will do that as well, right? A ring makes your hand a feature, and even maybe a topic of conversation, right? Oh, that's a new ring. Where did you receive that from? It's very nice. I like it. It's indicative of the relationship that you now have, okay? And then the last one I think is really interesting is that praise, right, in its ornamental nature, opens and increases, right? It opens and increases, okay? And to illustrate this, this is a beautiful, beautiful book. It will change your life if you read it. Jean Chrétien wrote Spacious Joy, and he meditates on the question of how does one's heart dilate? In other words, how does one's heart open? And he does this wonderful, wonderful discussion of the word "oh." also just, oh, Lord. Right? Oh, Lord, how majestic is your name. Right? Oh. And he comments on the fact that, oh, right, opens. It opens the mouth, right? But let me just retract for a minute, right? Ornament opens and increases, but it opens and increases the eyes, right? Like we say, oh, okay, we look very carefully. The hands, right? When you see something delicate and interesting, you reach for it. So it opens the hands, right? And especially if it's very fine. You don't like reach for something that's very fine and delicate and clearly articulated with blunt things. You oh, okay, you pick that up. Okay, it opens the ears. Dr. Gordon yesterday was talking about the sublime nature of music, and when you listen to music that is carefully articulated, right, in melody and in antiphony, your ears strain to hear the notes, right? And that's also in the nature of the treatment of volume in music, right? You know, sometimes the artist in music will create a diminutive phrase so that you strain to hear, right? To strain, okay? Which is probably why amplification is such a diminishment of that. But the last one is that ornament as praise opens the mouth. Opens the mouth, right? You say, oh. And one of the things interesting, you can try this maybe when you're by yourself and you don't want to embarrass yourself, is try to exclaim and say, oh, about something and not have it move something in your heart. So now I get to the title of the paper. Rhetoric is largely understood in its classical sense as speech, right? It's been literaturized, right, in the history of writing and speaking, but largely it's understood as speech. And speech is an interesting thing, especially speech that is praise, right? Because speech that is praise always vivifies the thing that it's speaking of, right? It always, as we say, attends to, returns to, distinguishes and elevates, opens and increases, right? It's almost like the description of growing, right? But not growing as in like growing larger, but growing as in opening. And so rhetoric as the ornament of, or orality, right? Speech is as the ornament of literacy, breathes life back into the text, right? By careful attention to the text, by an explication and articulation of the text, by an exclamation of the text, right? The text is revived. Right? The image that was shared yesterday, I couldn't remember it was paper, but I wanted to make note of this. The image of the permanence of the written Decalogue inside the Ark of the Covenant, bathed in the light of the Shekinah glory. What a beautiful image, right? The law enclosed in the glory of God's light. Just a fascinating image, okay? So rhetoric breathes life back into what is written down, okay? This would look like chicken scratch if you saw what I'm looking at, okay? But it's not what I'm saying, okay? It's a mnemonic device, okay? It both receives, right, and invigorates and renews what was dead and lost and concealed. And in one sense, it is a resurrection, right? Also immediately reveals the character or tone of the material, right? Either the lost author, the voice of the author is immediately, but the heart of the author is also revealed in the voicing of the text. And that's why this commentary on poetry last night was so helpful, right? To think about what is poetry and what does it do, right? And usually poetry does have words like "oh" in it. And nobody says, why is that word there anyway? What's it doing? But everyone always knows what "oh" is doing, okay? And so to speak of something, right, with praise, right, is to almost like bring it to song, right? To amplify what it is that one is speaking of. The former Greek rhetorical tradition was encomium, right? To speak high praise of something, right? To elevate it, to distinguish it, to place attention upon it, and to show it for what it is. And so a song of praise is also a song of delight and a song of joy, which is also a song of desire, which is also a song of love, and also a song of light. Thank you.
Oh, that was good. Don't disappear. There may be questions, comments, responses. Here.
So, thank you, Joel.
You're welcome.